Harry Potter becomes a communist. Chapter 1. The New Harry. Harry, you look different, said Hermione as I joined her non-in compartment on the Hogwarts Express. I suppose I did. I was wearing a Nishanka with a red star, a Che Guevara t-shirt, and brow-lined glasses. I had grown a scruffy beard and had had my scar changed from a lightning bolt to a hammer and sickle. Why are you wearing a shirt with that murderer on it? Asked Hermione as I sat down. He's not a murderer, he's a soldier, I explained. I'd be offended, but I know you've been brainwashed by the bourgeoisie capitalist establishment. You're suffering from false consciousness. What's false consciousness? Asked Ron curiously. I knew he would be more open to communist ideas because he was part of the proletariat, whereas Hermione was part of the bourgeois intelligentsia. False consciousness is when people think communism is bad, I explained. Since communism is good, it means they're obviously insane. Harry, are you a communist? Asked Hermione in a quiet voice. I could tell she was scared, probably of losing her private property. As a matter of fact, I am, I said, knowing I had nothing to be ashamed of. Uncle Vernon was complaining about communists one day, and I decided that anyone hated by Uncle Vernon couldn't be that bad, so I read the Communist Manifesto and discovered how the world really worked. But, said Hermione, I lost for words. President Reagan said that the Soviet Union was the evil empire. He wouldn't have said that if it weren't true. I sighed, wondering if Hermione was too deep in false consciousness to ever come around to the correct way of thinking. Chapter 2. Freedom of Speech. Everyone stared at me as I entered the entrance hall, which was the entrance to Hogwarts. I guess most people in the wizarding world didn't know much about communism, because they just seemed to think I looked weird. That was good. I'd be able to talk to them about communism without having to break through the revulsion conditioned into so many people by Western media. Suddenly, Professor McGonagall approached me. Now that I knew about communism, I could see that her face had the smug, satisfied look of bourgeois elitism. You are not permitted to wear that shirt, she said oppressively. Che Guevara was an evil murderer or something. How fucking dare you, I yelled outrageously. I fucking have fucking freedom of fucking speech. Mr. Potter, that kind of language is not allowed in school, McGonagall said capitalistically. Neither is the image of Che Guevara, the hammer and sickle, and other symbols of hate. The fucking hammer and sickle are not fucking symbols of hate, I explained. They are fucking symbols of fucking peace. Fucking anti-communism fucking led to imperialist and fucking racist wars in Korea and fucking Vietnam. You're a fucking racist. Then I put up my middle finger at her and ran into the Great Hall before she could stop me. I couldn't believe racist Professor McGonagall had tried to repress me. It was like Kent State all over again. Chapter 3. Dumbledore's Announcement. I instantly saw the Great Hall had changed a great deal over the summer. The walls were now covered with gigantic, flashy advertisements. Everywhere, the glossy and fake images showed the smiling faces of people thrilled to own consumer products made by starving children in Japan. Thoroughly disgusted by these symbols of bourgeois excess, I tried to avoid looking at them as I walked to my seat. As Dumbledore began to walk up to the podium, I saw that he was dressed exactly like the little Monopoly man, complete with the top hat. Hello, my students, he said, stretching out his arms. As you've probably noticed, Hogwarts looks a bit different this year. That's because the Ministry of Magic has been spending so much on wars against Voldemort that there's no money left over for Hogwarts. Therefore, I decided it'd be a good idea to privatize the educational system. I don't see any problem with this because I'm a libertarian, I gasped. I had never known Dumbledore was a libertarian. Libertarians had the gall to say that they loved freedom while being nothing but corporate shills working tirelessly to make us all slaves to the big capitalists. All the respect I'd ever had for Dumbledore disappeared in an instant. This year, said Dumbledore, his face shining with corporate greed, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry is brought to you by the Bertie Bott's Candy Corporation. Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. They're a risk with every mouthful. And by the Nimbus Racing Broom Company. Why walk when you can fly with the Nimbus Racing Broom Company? Additional funding is provided by Gladrag's Wizardwear Group, WizHard Books, and Coca-Cola. My mouth was hanging open. I couldn't believe the extent to which Dumbledore sold us out to all the capitalists for $1. If I were in his place, I'd have closed Hogwarts before turning it over to evil corporate sponsors. And now, Dumbledore continued, allow me to introduce our new defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Halliburton Pepsi. A man in an expensive suit with a briefcase stepped forward. He was obviously a member of the art capitalist bourgeois elite. Thank you for that introduction, Albus, Professor Pepsi said corporately. By the way, I want your office. Oh, no problem, Hal, said Dumbledore, laughing. Professor Pepsi grinned, and I felt sick as I realized that corporate fuck would be the real boss at Hogwarts from now on. Chapter 4. False Consciousness. The feast began, and we started to eat the food and shit. I thought of how the house elves were completely happy with their lot in life and realized that they too had been inflicted with false consciousness. Hermione had railed against house elf slavery, but it had accomplished nothing because she hadn't realized that it was just one small part of the larger capitalist system of bourgeois capitalist exploitation. It's a good thing Hogwarts isn't funded by the government anymore, said Hermione with an air of bourgeois intellectual elitism. Now the educational system won't be like the post office. You fucking idiot, I yelled righteously. Dumbledore has turned us all over to the fucking capitalists. We're their fucking corporate slaves now. Swearing like that is really unnecessary and comes across as immature, said Hermione oppressively. How fucking dare you, I yelled. You say I can't speak my fucking mind after you defend the fucking actions of that fucking war criminal Dumbledore? I suppose you believe the fucking propaganda we're fed about how we're fighting a, quote, humanitarian war. Well, aren't we? Asked Hermione. Voldemort is bad. I know it's true because that's what the media says. There is no such thing as a humanitarian war, I said as I laughed in her face. The Ministry doesn't give a fuck about human rights. War is a product of the military-industrial complex. I don't think that's true, said Hermione from her ivory tower bourgeois of capitalism. It's the Ministry's duty to kill people who kill people because killing people is wrong. At this point, I was so mad at Hermione's bourgeois, closed-minded, false consciousness that I couldn't say anything. If only she could hear herself and realize what a slave she was to the capitalist imperialists. But it seemed she couldn't. It was so frustrating. Chapter 5. Arise, comrades. My anger would fade later. As we started to get up from the feast in order to head upstairs to our upstairs dormitories, Luna Lovegood came over to me. She was quite a hottie, but I was too sophisticated to pay too much attention to her shapely body and huge breasts. I overheard your conversation with Hermione, said Luna in a beautifully feminine voice. I think what you had to say made a lot of sense. But it got even better later that night. As we arrived in our dormitory room, Ron turned to look at me, his face alight with hope and curiosity. I agree with every word you said to Hermione at dinner, he said rebelliously. I always wondered why this war on Voldemort seemed like nothing but an excuse to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. Now I see that's exactly what it is. You must tell me more about this communism you speak of. I smiled wisely and slapped Ron on the back. You're beginning your journey, comrade, I told him. Comrade? Asked Ron. Why are you calling me that? That's what communists call each other, I explained. Under capitalism, the richest 1% are fucking bastards who exploit 99% of the people. Communism thinks that's wrong. Why should your family starve while the richest pure-blood fucks are literally swimming in their fucking gold? There's enough resources for everyone, and we should all get an equal share of the pie. That's why we communists call each other comrade, to show that we are all equal. What's communism's position on racism? Asked Dean Thomas. It's against it, I explained. Racism is caused by capitalism. Ever since the war on Voldemort started, the Ministry's been sending young black men off to fight for a society which hates them. Could it be any more obvious that the real enemy is not Voldemort, but the fucking bourgeoisie capitalist 1%? I don't know, said Neville uncertainly. If that were true, I think we'd have heard something about it before. I laughed in his face at his fucking incredible naivete. That's because the fucking capitalists don't want you to hear it, I told him, laughing loudly. If you embrace communism, that's a threat to their fucking bourgeoisie power. They want us all to go off and kill Death Eaters to keep us distracted from the inequalities of our fucking corporate sellout society. Silence followed these words. I could tell I had turned their brainwashed view of the world upside down. Had I made them see the light? Eventually, Seamus Finnegan stood up. I am a communist, he said. There was a tense silence, and then Neville stood up. "Me too," he said proudly. I beamed at Neville. Finally, he'd achieved the success he had never been able to under the bourgeoisie capitalist corporate system of capitalism. "Me three," declared Ron, as I knew he would. He was part of the proletariat, and I had awakened him from his false consciousness. "Me four," finished Dean. His embrace of communism was the least surprising, as he truly had nothing to lose but his chains. Not only was he part of the proletariat, but he was racially oppressed because of his skin color. Like all wars, the bourgeoisie imperialist war on Voldemort had been built on the fear of the other, and black people like Dean had suffered for it. I smiled at my four new comrades. I knew there would be more of us soon. Together we would bring down Dumbledore's bourgeoisie capitalist machine and achieve freedom for the fucking proletariat through violent means if necessary.